these are the specifics that do start to come out and do actually start to matter. So Heim, in his counter-proposal, offers this orientational pluralism, this kind of divergent style pluralism. And he uses this analogy of travel. The idea might be something like this. I don't remember exactly how he says it in the book, but it's something like this. Imagine that I'm a person who is going from Washington, D.C. to New York. And now imagine another person who's going from L.A. to Honolulu. The means to go from D.C. to New York will in many cases be different from the means to go from L.A. to Honolulu. I can go, for example, to New York from D.C. by bus if I wanted to. I can take a bus. But is that really a legitimate option if I'm trying to get from L.A. to Honolulu? No. So there are some ways that work and there are some ways that don't. So it does matter. We can't just rest in the abstract and say, oh, the D.C. New York route and the L.A. Honolulu route are both examples of travel. Just something really abstract like that. That's meaningless, is what Heim is saying. Travel, so what? It's one thing moving from one place to another. But really, when you get down into the nitty-gritty of it, and this is important stuff, it does matter, right? And when you look at the culture of Washington, D.C. and the culture of L.A., your starting points are very different, aren't they? And then when you look at your destinations, New York City is going to be very different from Honolulu, isn't it? So all along, from the beginning to the end of each of these paths, you have all this difference. And there's a tendency among the convergent pluralists to kind of denigrate that difference and to put it aside. And these people, I would actually consider myself at least partly in this camp, but these folks would see themselves as having the best of intentions, and in fact what they're doing is they're steamrolling a great deal of diversity. And for me, I started off very firmly in John Hick's camp, and having read that critique and initially being infuriated by it, I've come around to thinking, that's true. Genuine respect means I'm going to have to do the legwork of learning about these traditions. And having done some legwork, like in a tradition like Buddhism, I've done a little bit of study in Buddhism, I have come to the conclusion that it's probably better to be cautious than to make some kind of grandiose claim about how we're all on the same page, but we're doing it in different ways. We have to be very, very careful about that kind of thing. Okay, so those are some of the critiques that Heim has given about this. So there's this idea of crypto-inclusivity that's in there, the fact that Hick's pluralism is a kind of a hypocritical idea because it's not really plural, because it's still talking about this sort of essential oneness or something. There's another critique, too, from the Zen tradition. There's a critique of the model in the sense that when Hick talks about ultimate reality, he wants us to think of it as kind of having this outer phenomenal layer and this inner noumenal core that we can never get to. And there are other religious traditions that would agree with that sort of schema, but Zen Buddhism doesn't strike me as one of them. My impression of Zen is that when you practice, you are coming to see with the Dharma eye, basically. And once you start to see, truly see with pure perception, to the point where subject and object actually fall away, where you can't even talk about experience because the word experience is still subject-object metaphysics. You've reached a point now where you've basically pierced into ultimate reality. You're there. You're absolutely there. So there's none of this inaccessible, noumenal kind of thing in Zen. And there was actually a Korean author who wrote about this, and I'll have to dig it up and put it on my blog at some point, but he wrote a paper that offers this kind of a Zen-style critique of John Hick's position. My point here is that it's not just a fellow Christian critiquing John Hick. Hick and Heim are both Christian, but it's also people outside the Christian tradition who would have reason not to like this model necessarily. I mean, how would your traditional Muslim view Hick's model, right? Because now the Muslim paradigm is basically, it has to submit to Hick's paradigm. How are they going to view that? So yeah, I would agree that there are some problems that need to be worked out here. At the same time, I can't help feeling some sympathy for what Hick is doing. And Hick's response to Heim in his 1995 book, there, A Christian Theology of Religion, includes the idea that, if you think about divergent pluralism leading to multiple ultimate realities, well, Hick as a philosopher is thinking, how can you have multiple ultimates? Doesn't the word itself imply that, it's all going to come down to one thing ultimately? There you go. So Hick says that, and generally I tend to think too that when you look around the world and two people of different traditions are talking to each other, are we totally separated from each other because we're so rooted in our own traditions that we actually occupy different universes? I don't think so. I think there is a certain oneness about reality. And it's a numerical oneness. So it seems absurd to me to say that everybody just goes off to their own little thing and that's the end of the story. Anyway, the critique, nevertheless, is a very powerful one. And I tend to think that, we should listen to it. Now, Heim's style of divergent pluralism also has its critics. He envisions this almost in a kind of live and let live sort of paradigm where there's almost no cross-pollination. But the fact of the matter is that people do cross-pollinate all the time. Heim's position, this orientational pluralism, sometimes I have kind of trouble figuring out what he's getting at. Because on the one hand, he seems to be offering a paradigm that allows people to practice their own traditions. At the same time, in his book, he makes it clear that each person from their position has every right to proclaim that their position is the best one. And he spends a lot of his book talking about the rationality of saying what you say from your perspective. I can understand that. I can understand what he's trying to get at. If you're a Christian, for example, and you're really strongly convicted in your Christianity, then you're going to proclaim that, aren't you? You're going to, why not? That's the truth as you see it. And somebody else is going to do that from their corner, and so on and so on and so forth. Hick, I don't know if Hick necessarily agrees with looking at things quite that way. For Hick, he has a notion called eschatological verification. Basically, the only way we're really going to know the real truth of the matter is after we die. Eschaton is the Greek term for the end times, and here Hick uses it kind of in a personal sense, referring to your personal end. So it's only at that time, there might be some kind of a post-mortem revelation, or, we may just discover that death is the end, and that's basically it. So anyway, as you see, the critiques go back and forth, and pluralism is not necessarily the most perfect, hunky-dory, enlightened position that at first it may seem to be for people who have a kind of liberal religious inclination. I should also note, by the way, speaking of liberal, I said that Heim was an evangelical Protestant, so he actually develops this paradigm, and at the same time he will continue to proclaim the supremacy of Jesus Christ, the uniqueness and normativity of Jesus Christ, even while holding this paradigm up for other people to use as they see fit. I don't know what you think of that. Take from this discourse what you will, but there we have it. Basically what you see is that talking about pluralism gets very messy very quickly. And part of the reason is there are different models of pluralism out there, and there are just different ways to critique them. Perhaps later we can talk about model-free pluralism, this idea that Raimundo Panikar seems to advocate. But that's it for now. Thank you very much.